I want you to try something intensely physical right now. Like wherever you are listening to this deep dive, just reach out and firmly tap something solid.
Yeah, anything works.
Right, like the wooden desk right in front of you, or maybe the leather steering wheel of your car, or, even just tapping the glass screen of your phone.
Just feel that resistance, right against your knuckles.
Exactly. Listen to the sound it makes. And notice how that sensation feels, well, entirely binary. I mean, your hand definitively ends and the desk definitively begins.
Right.
The boundary is just fixed. It feels absolutely, completely real and unquestionable.
It's the ultimate diagnostic certainty, really.
Yeah.
We rely on that tactile feedback to assure ourselves that the world is stable.
We really do.
When you knock on wood, you are physically confirming this deep metaphysical assumption.
Yeah.
You're proving that you exist as an independent subject, and the desk exists as an independent object.
It is incredibly comforting. We crave that level of precision in just about every aspect of our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about getting a medical diagnosis. Like you fall, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and the doctor puts an X-ray up on one of those stark black light boards.
The jagged white line?
Yeah, exactly. There is a jagged white line running right through the bone. The doctor points a pen at it and says, there is the fracture.
Right, it's clean.
It is clean, it is categorized, and it has hard, undeniable boundaries. Broken or not broken. No in between.
We desperately need things to be visible and neatly compartmentalized like that. But our sources for this deep dive are inviting us to step into a completely different diagnostic landscape.
A really old one, right?
Yeah, the world of 2nd century Indian philosophy. When we look through the lens of Nagarjuna and his masterwork, the Madhyamaka, that comforting X-ray machine just completely shatters.
The light board flickers out.
Exactly. The solid bones of reality, the very things we treat as the fundamental building blocks of the universe, they begin to reveal themselves as this elaborate mirage.
The root versus on the middle way. I mean, our mission today is to place your comfortable, solid reality under Nagarjuna's microscope.
And it's a very powerful microscope.
It is. We are going to dismantle the 5 fundamental building blocks. We can call it the quintet of our conventional reality.
The quintet, right.
Yeah. So first, we are going to deconstruct consciousness, which is you, the subject. Then we are going to deconstruct phenomena, which are the objects you interact with.
The things out there.
Right. Third, we'll tear apart causality, which is the relational glue holding it all together. And finally, we will dismantle the background theater itself, so space and time.
And on a conventional level, we navigate the universe by treating these 5 spheres as completely separate entities.
Like billiard balls bouncing off each other.
Exactly like that. We believe they bump into each other while retaining their own individual absolute essence. But Nagarjuna, he developed a highly rigorous diagnostic tool, Madhyamaka Logical Reasoning, to systematically prove that every single one of these spheres is entirely empty of independent existence.
So we are going to apply his 11-step logic to the quintet, right?
Yes, starting with his famous 4-cornered logic, the tetralemma. We'll use it to prove that relying on the solidity of these things leads to absolute logical absurdity.
But before we pull the rug out from under the universe, we have to establish the stakes here.
That's important, yeah.
If you are listening to this and feeling a wave of existential dread, just hold on. The goal here isn't to leave you floating in some terrifying, meaningless void,
No, not at all.
Nagarjuna wasn't some nihilist trying to destroy reality.
Far from it, actually.
Yeah.
He viewed himself as a spiritual physician. He was attempting to cure a pervasive psychological and philosophical disease.
A disease of the mind.
Right. The texts call this disease reification. It is the human obsession with taking fluid dynamic processes and freezing them into solid, permanent things.
Because we want things to stay put.
Exactly. We suffer immensely because we treat shifting events as absolute, unchangeable facts. So the logic we are about to explore, it's the medicine to cure us of that painful need to grasp at mirages.
I love that framing. So to understand the cure, we really have to diagnose the setup first.
Step 1 of the process.
Right. We have to look at how and why our brains construct this rigid, reified version of reality in the first place. Like, why do I look at a seamless universe and automatically slice it up into independent subjects, independent objects, and linear causes?
Well, a modern neuroscientist would point straight to evolutionary biology. And honestly, it aligns perfectly with the ancient Buddhist concept of ignorance.
Really? How so?
Our brains just did not evolve to perceive ultimate philosophical truths. They evolved to keep us alive on the savannah.
Oh, I see. Survival of the fittest.
Yeah. To survive, the human visual cortex became highly specialized in a computational process called edge detection.
Edge detection, literally the brain finding the boundary where one physical thing ends and another begins.
Precisely. Because if you are foraging in the jungle, you cannot afford to view the world as a beautiful, interconnected tapestry of shifting light and shadow.
Right, because that shifting shadow might eat you.
Exactly. You need your brain to instantly draw a hard, absolute boundary between the concept of tiger and the concept of tree.
You must believe that you are a completely separate entity from the predator, and that the predator is a completely separate entity from the environment.
So we naturally, almost violently, slice a continuous universe into distinct subjects, distinct objects, and the causal relations between them. We essentially hallucinate borders for the sake of survival.
It is a brilliant survival reflex, sure, but Nagarjuna argues that this biological software creates a profound philosophical delusion.
It's a trap.
It tricks us into believing in what the texts call svabhava.
Right, svabhava. It roughly translates to inherent existence, or independent existence, or even own being.
Own being, I like that.
It is the deeply ingrained assumption that a thing has a fixed, isolated, independent essence. Because our brains detect a visual edge around the desk, we just project an independent essence onto it.
So we assume the whole quintet is infected with svabhava.
We do. We believe our consciousness exists independently of the objects we perceive. And we believe time and space are just these giant, empty cardboard boxes that we move through as solid objects.
I want to challenge this idea of svabhava with something highly modern, if that's okay, because while we talk about inherent existence abstractly, it is shockingly hard to break our habit of seeing it everywhere.
Go for it. It's a sticky concept.
Think about a massive corporation, right? Like Apple. We talk about Apple like it is a solid noun, a singular entity with inherent existence.
We definitely do.
We say things like, Apple released a new phone, or Apple bought a startup. We assign it a definitive, absolute identity.
We treat it as an independent agent capable of generating causal actions,
Mm.
like it's a person.
Exactly. But if you actually try to physically locate the inherent existence of Apple, the concept dissolves completely. I mean, where is it?
It's nowhere.
Is the essence of Apple residing in the CEO? No, the CEO could resign tomorrow, and Apple still exists. Is it the glass headquarters building?
They could move the headquarters to Texas, and it is still Apple.
Right. Is it the individual employees, the source code, the manufacturing plants, the bank accounts? None of those individual parts possess the inherent standalone essence of the corporation.
They are all just pieces.
If you strip away the employees, the buildings, and the products, there is no glowing orb of Apple-ness left behind.
That's a perfect analogy. The corporation is merely a conceptual label placed on top of a highly complex, constantly shifting web of relational actions.
It's just a label.
Yeah, it is a legal, financial, and social flux. There is no core.
And we intuitively accept that. Any lawyer or economist knows a corporation is just a relational web.
Sure they do.
So why is it so incredibly hard for me to accept that I, the conscious observer walking to the kitchen, am also just a relational web?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why do I demand that my consciousness, the space I walk through, and the time it takes all possess a solid, unchanging core? Why am I willing to dissolve Apple, but I'm terrified to dissolve myself?
Because recognizing that you lack a solid core induces profound existential vertigo. I mean, it deeply threatens the ego's demand for permanence.
The ego hates it.
Hates it. This is why Nagarjuna doesn't rely on gentle metaphors. He uses a brutal, inescapable logical engine known as the tetralemma or the four-cornered logic to trap the mind.
So we're going to apply this logic to the relationships between the five spheres now.
Yes. And the most strategic place to start is by attacking the ultimate trapdoor of reality, which is causality.
Causality, the relationship between the subject and the object. Why is cause and effect the most vulnerable target to start with?
Think of it this way. Causality is the glue holding the entire conventional illusion together.
Okay.
If I can prove that an independent entity A acts upon an independent entity B, then A and B must be absolutely inherently real.
Right.
Fake things cannot cause real things to happen.
That makes sense.
So if you can break the causal relation, the independent subjects and objects on either side of it lose their anchor entirely.
All right, so we are applying the four extremes of the tetralemma to cause and effect. And the rules of this logic are completely exhaustive.
Very strict rules.
Something either arises from itself, it arises from another, it arises from both, or it arises from neither. There's no secret fifth option, right?
None. We are blocking all the exits.
Let's test the first extreme then. Does an effect arise from itself? This would mean the cause and the effect are exactly the same inherent thing.
In ancient Indian philosophy, this was the view that the effect already exists latently within the cause, like the essence of the sprout is fully present inside the seed.
So the cause just unfolds into the effect.
That was the argument, yes.
But logically, if the seed and the sprout are identically the same inherent entity, then the act of production is completely redundant.
It achieves absolutely nothing.
If A and B are the same thing, no creation has occurred. It is like trying to bake a cake by serving your guests a bowl of raw flour, claiming the cake is already latently in there.
That's a great way to picture it.
If the cause and effect are identical, the action of causality literally does nothing. You are stuck in a frozen loop of the present.
Right, so self-causation is logically meaningless, which leads the conceptual mind to instantly panic and jump to the second corner of the tetralemma.
Which is where most of us live.
Yes, which happens to be difference, other causation.
The assumption that the cause and the effect are totally different, independent entities. The seed is one thing, the sprout is another, the parent is one thing, the child is another.
It feels like undeniable common sense, doesn't it?
It totally does.
Well, the Abhidharma scholars of Nagarjuna's time built massive obsessive taxonomies around this exact idea. They believe the universe was constructed of tiny, independent, inherent building blocks of reality.
Like atomic Legos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They would argue that in an ecological system, the wolf hunting is an absolute independent cause, and the dead elk is the absolute independent effect. They are two inherently different things.
Okay, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here because my modern brain is screaming that this is correct. The wolf and the elk are different things. A wolf obviously kills an elk. The wolf's teeth physically pierce the elk's skin. Energy transfers. That is causality working between two different entities.
Conventionally, yes, the teeth are the bridge. I mean, we're not denying that wolves eat elk, but remember, we are testing for svabhava.
Inherent existence.
Right. We are testing the hypothesis that the wolf and the elk possess absolute inherent independence. If an entity is truly independent, its defining characteristic is that it does not rely on, react to, or connect with anything outside of itself.
Oh.
If it has a porous border where energy can transfer in and out, it is dependent, not independent.
I see. So if the cause and the effect are absolutely independent and separate, possessing their own closed-loop essences, they are hermetically sealed.
Exactly. There is no bridge between them.
They are separated by an infinite metaphysical canyon.
Right.
If the wolf and the elk are completely inherently separate realities, the wolf biting the elk wouldn't transfer any causal energy.
They would just slide past each other in their own isolated dimensions, like ghosts.
But even if we drop the strict independence, what if we just say difference is the main mechanism? Like, if being different is what allows cause and effect to happen.
If absolute difference is the fundamental mechanism of causality, causality breaks down into complete, terrifying randomness.
How do you mean?
Well, a wolf is completely inherently different from an elk, right?
Yes.
But a wolf is also completely inherently different from a pine tree, a granite boulder, or a thunderstorm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If being an entirely different entity is the only requirement for causality to function, then planting a rock could grow an oak tree. Pouring water on a desk could start a forest fire.
Because the rock is just as other to the tree as a seed is.
Exactly. If things are completely isolated in their otherness, there is no shared continuum to explain why a specific seed produces a specific sprout, but a pebble does not.
They require a dependent connection. They have to share a relational reality.
Yes, if you enforce absolute difference, causality becomes impossible.
Okay, so the cause cannot arise from itself because that is redundant. It cannot arise from an inherently separate other because that severs the connection entirely or leads to chaos.
Which brings us to the third option.
Yeah.
Can causality be a combination of both?
Well, mashing two broken logical bridges together doesn't suddenly engineer a stable one.
It really doesn't.
You just get the redundancy of self-causation mixed with the chaotic randomness of other causation. It fails twice as hard.
Which leaves the final corner of the tetralemma. Neither. Meaning things just pop into existence spontaneously with no causes or conditions whatsoever.
Pure chaotic magic.
Magic.
Which completely violates every ounce of our lived experience. We plant seeds to get crops. Things do not just materialize out of the ether.
So what is the unavoidable conclusion of running causality through the tetralemma?
The causal relation cannot exist independently of the objects it connects, and the objects cannot exist independently of the causal relation.
It's all tied together.
The cause, the causality, and the effect only exist as a completely inseparable, interdependent package deal.
If you remove the destination, you remove the action of going, and you instantly delete the identity of the goer. The relation itself is entirely empty of inherent existence.
Its glue is gone.
The glue is gone.
And this realization creates a desperate panic in the mind. When you take away the solid objects and you dissolve the solid relations holding them together, the mind searches frantically for an escape route.
It wants something solid to stand on.
Right. It looks for a container to hold on to. We think, okay, maybe the objects themselves are empty illusions. Maybe the causal links between them are empty, but the flow of time they exist in and the distance of space they move through those have to be real.
They are the fixed background canvas of the universe, we assume.
Exactly. It is the Newtonian assumption that time and space are an absolute theater stage, existing independently of the actors on it.
But Nagarjuna ruthlessly applies the exact same tetralemma to the background.
Let's do it. Let's deconstruct time first.
When an action occurs, for example, when you take a physical step forward, where exactly does that action exist within the framework of time?
Let's run the diagnostic. It obviously doesn't exist in the past.
Right, the past is already gone.
The physical energy of the step is spent. The footprints on the floor behind me are empty of active, living motion.
And it cannot exist in the future either.
Because the future is not yet gone. The action hasn't begun. The space in front of you hasn't been traversed.
There is no active motion residing in tomorrow waiting for you to catch up to it.
So, process of elimination leaves me with the present. My mind screams that the motion must be happening right now.
Of course it does.
If I am sprinting on a treadmill, my heart is pounding, sweat is pouring down my face, my legs are burning, I feel the raw reality of motion occurring precisely in the present moment.
You feel the psychological, conventional experience of motion. But Nagarjuna forces us to interrogate the actual physics of an absolute present.
The physics of it.
Yeah. If time inherently exists, and we sever the present from the past and the future to isolate it as an independent reality, what exactly are we left with?
We are looking for an absolute present moment.
But a truly isolated present has zero duration.
Zero duration. Wow. Because if the present moment had any duration at all, even a millionth of a millisecond, it would have a beginning, which would technically be the past.
Right.
And it would have an end, which would technically be the future.
Yes. To isolate the present, it has to be an infinitely thin, dimensionless slice of time.
Now, consider the fundamental physics of movement. Motion fundamentally requires physical displacement. It requires a transition from state A to state B.
Can physical displacement occur within a moment of absolute zero duration?
No, it is physically impossible.
It's a freeze frame.
Exactly. It is like looking at a single high-speed photograph of a bullet fired from a gun. In that frozen, infinitely thin frame, the bullet is completely static.
It is suspended in midair.
There is zero blur, zero motion within the frame itself. Motion inherently needs a span across time to exist.
This logic actually mirrors Zeno's arrow paradox from ancient Greece, arriving at the exact same profound conclusion in India.
A single frozen frame contains no motion.
Right. If the past is dead, the future is unborn, and the present is an infinitely thin static frame, where exactly does the inherent motion of time reside?
It doesn't. Time has no inherent flow from its own side.
None at all.
The flow of time is just a conceptual boundary our minds use to glue together the immediate past and the immediate future. It is a cognitive editing trick.
Like stringing together thousands of static photographs and spinning them rapidly to create the illusion of a movie.
Yeah, the movie isn't in the film strips. It's an illusion generated by the mind observing the sequence.
Time is an empty relational construct. It does not exist independently of the events occurring within it.
So if time falls apart, what about space? What about physical motion through a spatial grid?
Well, if I ask how we travel from point A to point B, I assume there is a solid, inherent mover traveling through an empty, inherent void.
We assume the grid is real.
But Nagarjuna attacks this by looking at the logical grammar of movement. He introduces what he calls the fallacy of two motions.
I struggle with this one, so walk me through the fallacy of two motions. Because trying to separate the noun from the verb feels like trying to peel the wetness off of water.
It's a brilliant linguistic and logical trap. Let's assume you possess inherent existence and you are defined as a mover. That is your absolute identity as a subject.
Okay.
To be inherently defined as a mover, the quality of motion must already be baked into your identity. We'll call that inherent quality. Motion 1.
Motion 1.
It is what makes you a walker instead of a sitter, even before you take a step.
Okay, so motion 1 gives me my ID badge. I am the mover. It is my static essence.
Now, the opponent claims that this inherent mover is currently performing a physical action across physical space. They are engaging in the active verb of walking.
The actual stepping.
Right, that requires a second, entirely separate instance of motion. Let's call the verb motion 2.
But wait, if I am already completely defined by motion 1 and I am actively executing motion 2, I am involved in 2 completely separate independent instances of moving.
Yes. And the brutal rules of logic demand that if there are 2 completely separate, independent actions of motion occurring, there must be 2 completely separate subjects performing them.
You cannot have an action without an agent.
Exactly.
So, by treating myself, the noun, and my action, the verb, as inherently separate, independent things, I have literally implied that there are 2 of me walking down the street.
A metaphysical ghost walker overlapping with your physical body.
That breaks reality. It is entirely absurd.
Therefore, the goer and the going cannot be completely separate entities. But they also cannot be entirely identical, because if the walker and the act of walking are exactly the same thing, the distinction collapses.
You have a verb without a noun, or a noun doing nothing at all.
Which means the subject doing the moving and the action of moving entirely co-arise.
Yeah.
They're mutually dependent.
You literally are the movement, and the movement is you.
Yes.
And this collapses the concept of space itself, right? Because a physical location only becomes the destination conceptually because an object is moving toward it.
Precisely. Let's test this. The tile floor in your kitchen isn't inherently a destination from its own side.
It's just a floor. It has no inherent pull. It only becomes my destination the exact moment I generate the intention to walk toward it.
And what happens the exact millisecond your foot makes contact with that tile?
The destination is completely annihilated.
Gone.
It instantly updates. The moment I arrive, the destination ceases to exist, and it immediately becomes my new origin for whatever action I take next.
Like walking to the refrigerator?
Yeah, opening the fridge. The origin, the distance, and the destination are fluid, shifting conceptual labels.
Space has no objective, inherent coordinates without things to map it. It is entirely relational.
So we have applied our diagnostic logic to the external scaffolding of reality. We have dismantled causality, we have dismantled time, we have dismantled space and motion.
It's all gone.
If I am the listener right now, I'm feeling incredibly exposed. I mean, the entire external world has dissolved into this fluid relational web of echoes.
It's unnerving.
My instinct is to retreat, to turn inward and barricade the doors. I think, okay, fine. The desk is empty, the space is empty, the time is an illusion. But I'm still here observing it all.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. My consciousness, my internal perception, must be the solid anchor in the storm. And this brings us to the core of the quintet consciousness versus phenomena, the co-arising mirror.
This is where Nagarjuna goes for the ultimate jugular of our daily experience. He is attacking subject-object dualism, which is the final stronghold of reification.
Let's frame this with an analogy that captures how we desperately want perception to work. Think about sitting at the eye doctor.
Well, I hate the eye doctor.
We all do. You are in that dimly lit room, your chin is resting firmly on the plastic guard, and the optometrist pulls down that massive, intimidating metal mask, the phoropter.
Right, the big, heavy thing.
They click the lenses back and forth and ask, better one or better two?
It is a vivid representation of the deeply ingrained assumption of independence.
The entire setup of that room is based on the ultimate assumption that there is an independent, stable subject, me, the consciousness sitting in the chair.
The passive observer.
Right. That subject is using a mechanical instrument, my physical eye, and the lenses to view an entirely independent, objective world. The glowing eye chart on the far wall.
It is exactly like a security camera bolted to a brick wall, passively recording a parking lot.
Subject, instrument, and object. 3 solid, inherently independent spheres. But if we apply our diagnostic logic, this structure immediately crumbles.
It falls apart fast. Nagarjuna first attacks the very idea that an instrument of perception can have inherent self-sufficient existence.
During his time, rival philosophical schools tried to defend the inherent existence of consciousness using the fire analogy, right?
Yes, the fire analogy.
They argued, look, a fire illuminates the dark room, revealing other objects like a table or a chair. But fire also illuminates itself. You don't need a flashlight to see a burning candle.
It makes intuitive sense.
Therefore, they claimed, consciousness can perceive the external world, and it can inherently validate its own existence.
It sounds like a bulletproof defense of self-awareness. But Nagarjuna points out a fatal flaw in the physics of their metaphor. He argues that fire does not illuminate itself.
Because the entire definition of illumination is the act of removing darkness. And there is no darkness inside the core of a fire for the fire to remove.
Exactly.
Therefore, fire doesn't apply its action of illumination to itself.
An action fundamentally requires a differential between the actor and the recipient. And Nagarjuna translates this directly to the biology and philosophy of perception.
Sight cannot see sight.
A camera lens cannot film its own glass.
A blade cannot cut itself. A fingertip cannot touch itself.
So if the sense organ cannot perceive its own nature, it lacks an independent, standalone power of seeing.
It is not an independent spotlight shining out of my skull, validating itself.
Because the perceiver lacks an independent essence, we must apply the tetralemma to its relationship with the perceived world to see if they can validate each other.
Let's run the logic. Are the perceiver and the perceived identical?
If the perceiver, me, and the perceived object, my coffee cup, are identical, then the entire structural distinction of perception collapses.
I literally am the coffee cup.
Yes, there is no spatial or cognitive distance for perception to happen across. Identity fails.
What if we jump to the opposite extreme? What if the perceiver and the perceived are completely different and inherently separate, which is exactly what the security camera analogy implies?
If your consciousness possesses an absolute, closed-loop, independent essence, you are sealed inside an airtight conceptual box.
I am separated by an unbridgeable metaphysical void from the external world.
Right. If you are truly independent, your internal state cannot be contingent on external data.
But observe your own mind. The exact moment you perceive an intense object, what happens to the perceiver?
Everything changes.
My internal state is immediately and violently altered. If I walk into the woods and suddenly perceive a grizzly bear, my heart rate spikes, my neurochemistry floods with adrenaline, my focus narrows entirely.
Your very state as a perceiver becomes entirely dependent on the presence of the bear.
The act of interacting destroys my claim to independence. I cannot be a passive, untouched observer.
You are thoroughly contingent. Therefore, the perceiver and the perceived cannot be identical, they cannot be inherently separate, they cannot be a combination of both, and they cannot be neither.
If I'm not a security camera passively recording an objective universe, what the hell is actually happening when I look around the room?
You are participating in a centerless fractal loop of karmic updating.
Karmic updating.
Yes. Consciousness and phenomena strictly co-arise. They are co-created in real time, instantly modifying each other in an infinite feedback loop.
Let me try to build a model of this using an analogy of tinted glasses.
That's a good way to picture it.
My past baggage, my biology, my memory, my emotional trauma, my immediate mood acts as a pair of permanently affixed tinted glasses.
Okay.
Let's say I just had a brutal, screaming argument with a friend in the hallway. My glasses now have a dark, angry red tint.
That is your conditioned state as the perceiver at time t-1.
I walk into a meeting room, the perceived object. The red tint of my perceiver state actively colors the room. I don't see a neutral room.
You see hostility.
I perceive the coworkers as hostile. Their innocent questions sound like passive-aggressive attacks. The environment feels chaotic. I am not passively recording the room. My subjective state is actively co-creating a hostile reality.
And then the feedback loop instantly engages.
Yes. The friction of encountering that hostile room, which I largely projected, spikes my stress levels even higher, which instantly adds another layer of tint to my glasses.
The tint gets darker.
They go from red to dark crimson. I am instantly updated into Perceiver 2.0. And when I turn to look at the next person who walks in the door, I am projecting a completely updated reality onto them.
The object you observed literally became part of the observer's framework for the very next millisecond.
That is the intricate mechanics of karmic updating. The perceiver is constantly updated by the world, and the updated perceiver instantly projects a new reality back onto the world.
There was never a pristine, first, blank slate perceiver sitting in the void, and there is no final, objective world waiting to be discovered.
It is an oscillating mirage. The texts call this a karmic mirage, right?
Yes, a karmic mirage. The reality we experience constantly bounces between the subjective pole and the objective pole so fast that it creates the illusion of a solid continuum.
Realizing this is Nagarjuna's direct attack on the deepest root of our psychological suffering.
It strikes right at the core.
If the perceiver, the perception, and the perceived are all empty of inherent existence, if they are just this co-evolving mirage, then the intense grasping, the deep desire, and the bitter hatred we feel toward the world is based on a fundamental delusion.
We are desperately trying to grab the reflection in the mirror, completely forgetting that our own face is casting the shadow.
But this triggers massive ontological vertigo. We have completely deleted the quintet. Consciousness, objects, causality, space, and time are all empty.
They are all gone.
So the listener is screaming, why does my hand still sting when I hit the desk? If it's all an empty mirage, why do I feel pain?
This is where Nagarjuna throws us the ultimate philosophical lifeline. He did not abandon us in a nihilistic void.
Oh, thank goodness.
Having proved emptiness, he reveals the flip side of the coin-dependent origination. Step 4 of the reasoning. The 5 spheres of the quintet are entirely empty of inherent existence, but they are absolutely inseparable, co-defined, and co-emergent.
I understand the logic of coemergence. It's like the concept of a parent and a child.
Exactly like that.
A parent cannot exist independently floating in a vacuum. The identity of a parent is strictly 100% dependent on the existence of a child.
The act of giving birth is what creates the parent.
The perceiver cannot exist without the perceived. Space cannot exist without an object moving through it.
Because they rely entirely on each other, they lack independent essence. But here is the profound paradox that resolves the vertigo, what is known as the union of the two truths.
Step 5.
Yes, things function conventionally, precisely because they are ultimately empty.
That feels like a riddle. Emptiness is what allows my hand to hit the desk. Walk me through the physics of that.
Consider the alternative. If the seed, the perceiver, the desk, or the flow of time possessed a hard, frozen shell of permanent, inherent essence, if they had svabhava, they would be utterly unchangeable.
Stuck forever.
If a seed was absolutely inherently locked into seedness, its border would be impenetrable. It could never break open, absorb water from the environment, and transform into a sprout. It would be a frozen atom of reality forever.
Oh, I see it. If my hand was absolutely inherently separate from the desk, we could never physically interact. The energy of the impact couldn't transfer.
Exactly.
If the present moment was a solid, absolute frame, time could never flow into the future. It is the very lack of solid boundaries that permits motion.
Yes. For the universe to function, for organic change to occur, for interactions to happen, reality must be profoundly fluid. It must lack a rigid core.
Emptiness is not a black hole of nothingness.
Not at all. It is the boundless matrix of possibility. Emptiness is the necessary breathing room of the universe that permits the conventional world to function flawlessly.
So the conventional truth that my hand hits the desk and it sends a pain signal up my arm, and the ultimate truth that the hand, the desk, and the pain are empty of absolute reality are two sides of the exact same coin.
They require each other.
Which means the 5 spheres of the quintet are deeply illusory. Step 6.
The ancient texts use beautiful, evocative metaphors to describe this state. Because the spheres dependently co-arise without independent cores, they are like an echo in a canyon, a reflection in a mirror, or a shimmering mirage on the horizon.
An echo is the perfect physical analogy. If I shout into a canyon, the echo is undeniably there conventionally.
You can hear it.
I can hear it, it can startle a bird, it functions as an acoustic wave, it has real-world consequences. But if I try to walk into the canyon and physically grab the echo with my hands, I will grasp empty air.
It slips right through your fingers.
It is functionally present, but totally devoid of a solid, locatable substance.
It is there, yet not there. But human psychology hates ambiguity. When the mind realizes the world is an echo, it gets terrified.
We want to put it in a box.
It desperately scrambles to find a new conceptual box to hide in. It wants to invent a new philosophical ism to explain reality and feel safe again.
And Nagarjuna anticipates this perfectly. He deploys a generalized tetralemma to block all the escape routes. Step 7.
He systematically strips away every single ism the frightened mind can conjure.
Let's run through them. First, he explicitly negates objectivism or realism.
Virtuality is not purely objective, because there is no observer-independent world sitting out there waiting to be seen. A universe without a consciousness to perceive it lacks absolute spatial coordinates, temporal boundaries, or defining features.
Okay, so if the outside world isn't real, the mind swings to the opposite pole. We try to claim subjectivism, idealism, or solipsism.
We say, it's all just a dream in my head.
My mind is the only real thing.
But he negates that as well. An empty, independent consciousness cannot act as a lonely projector. A dreamer fundamentally requires a dream in order to exist as a dreamer.
Without the external catalyst of phenomena to trigger cognition, the perceiver vanishes into nothingness.
Third, the mind tries to cling to the action itself. We negate relationalism or processism.
We say maybe the nouns aren't real, but the verbs are. The flow itself is the ultimate reality.
No, a relation cannot possess inherent existence if the entities it relates are empty. You cannot have a bridge to nowhere.
Right.
You cannot have a disembodied act of moving happening on the sidewalk without a goer and a destination. The flow is as empty as the objects flowing.
Fourth, and this is the one that always trips people up, especially those who dabble in spirituality, we negate monism.
This is a big one.
Doesn't almost all Eastern philosophy essentially preach that we are all just one giant featureless cosmic soup?
Yeah.
That all boundaries are totally fake and we are a radical, undifferentiated oneness.
This is a vital distinction, and Madhyamaka explicitly denies it. Reality is not a featureless, homogeneous oneness.
Why not?
If there were absolutely no conventional boundaries between subject and object, the biological mechanism of existence would completely shut down.
Because if I am literally the exact same undifferentiated cosmic soup as a stray dog, a dog bite cannot occur. Teeth cannot pierce skin if there is no boundary between teeth and skin.
The pain requires difference.
The dynamic play of difference is non-negotiable for interactions to happen. We dependently co-arise, but we are not a giant blob.
And finally, we explicitly negate nihilism, the darkest escape route.
Saying reality is neither objective nor subjective, or that simply nothing matters.
That denies the undeniable conventional occurrence of pain, joy, and causality. You still bleed if you hit a wall. You still cry when you lose someone. Nihilism ignores the echo.
So reality completely transcends our language. It's not objective, not subjective, not a relation, not a combination, not oneness, and not nothingness.
It leaves us standing in the middle way. Step 8.
Where on earth does that leave us?
We step off the conceptual spectrum entirely. The middle way navigates straight between eternalism, believing things are permanent and inherently real, and nihilism, believing nothing exists at all.
It's right down the center.
It is the profound, liberating realization that in absolute terms, there is nothing to accept, nothing to seek, nothing to add, and nothing to reject, abandon, or subtract.
We just let the conceptual tools drop to the floor, which sounds incredibly peaceful on a meditation cushion, but philosophy is completely useless if it doesn't survive Monday morning traffic.
It has to be practical.
How do I live inside an empty, dependently originated quintet? How do I pay my mortgage if causality, time, and space are just an echo?
This is the pinnacle of the practice. Step 9. Acting without acting. It means you engage fully, passionately, and fiercely in the conventional world, but you act without apprehending anything in absolute terms.
You use space, time, and causality as highly functional tools, but you are completely free from the psychological delusion that they are solid.
Let me hear an analogy for this.
Let me use a video game analogy, like playing a brutally hard game like Elden Ring. It is an incredibly stressful, immersive experience.
Oh, absolutely.
When you play, you engage passionately. You strategize, you dodge the dragon's fire, you use the conventional rules of the game's causality to survive. You genuinely try to win.
You're in it.
But deep down, you never forget you are playing a simulation. When your character dies, you might be frustrated, but you don't suffer genuine existential trauma because you know the dragon isn't inherently real.
You act without acting.
You play the game, but the game doesn't possess your soul.
It is a strong analogy for skillful engagement, but we must add one crucial caveat from the Madhyamaka perspective. In Elden Ring, the illusion is built on a base reality of physical code, hardware, and servers sitting in a data center somewhere.
Right, there's a real computer running it.
Madhyamaka is far more radical. There is no hidden base code running the universe. Emptiness is empty all the way down. The interdependent illusion is all there is.
Right. There is no real world outside the matrix to wake up into. Liberation happens right here, right now, in the middle of the game.
Yes.
Let's apply this to a real-world, high-stress situation, a corporate promotion. You want to become a vice president.
Conventionally, you prepare. You use causality. You build the presentation. You manage the team. You aim for the destination of the corner office across the dimension of time.
But the crippling anxiety comes from reification. The suffering comes when I project an absolute inherent essence onto that promotion.
You make it a matter of life and death.
I think if I get that title, I will have definitively arrived. My identity will be permanently validated. I will be safe. I try to freeze a fluid system.
And because reality is a centerless, constantly updating loop, freezing is impossible. If you get the promotion, the universe doesn't stop. The echo continues.
You instantly become a goer at origin for a new, terrifying set of executive stresses.
If you act without acting, You strive for the VP title, but you stop treating the outcome as an absolute judgment on your inherent worth. You play the corporate game fiercely, but you wear the concepts lightly.
The crushing anxiety drops away because you stop fighting the fundamental ontology of the universe. You are no longer trying to grasp water with your bare hands.
And if we extend this lack of absolute boundaries outward, it leads to the ultimate ethical pinnacle of the entire philosophy. Steps 10 and 11.
Primordial oneness and non-dual compassion.
Yes. If the perceiver and the perceived are constantly updating each other, and if your internal state is actively co-creating the external world, then the boundary between inside and outside is a conceptual illusion.
Which means the collective environment, the strangers on the street, the people I argue with, are literally an extended part of my own interdependent body.
Boundless compassion is not a moral commandment handed down by a deity. It's not an ethical rule you have to force yourself to obey through sheer willpower.
It's just reality.
It is the raw, mechanical, ontological reality of the universe.
If the boundary between self and other is a hallucination of the visual cortex, then the suffering of the world is physically and logically your own suffering.
Consider your own body. When your left hand accidentally touches a hot stove, your right hand doesn't pause to debate the moral ethics of assisting the left hand.
It doesn't weigh the pros and cons.
No, or say, well, the left hand should have been more careful, that's its karma. It inherently feels the interconnectedness of the single organism, and it pulls the left hand out of the fire instinctively.
You help others because in a universe of dependent origination, caring for the collective is as natural, as logical, and as selfishly necessary as caring for your own arm.
To hurt someone else is to literally tint the glasses that you have to look through tomorrow.
In this state of non-dual compassion, the intense grasping ceases. You perceive everything as primordially equal, pure, and perfect, just as it is.
You rest in the pure suchness of reality without needing to fix it, freeze it, or own it.
We have taken a massive reality-bending journey today. We dismantled the quintet. We proved that causality is an infinite loop of updates, not a straight line.
We really tore it all down.
We proved that space and time are relational illusions with no absolute coordinates and no inherent duration. We proved that consciousness is a co-arising mirror, constantly shaped by the world it perceives.
We navigated the two truths.
Escaped the traps of nihilism and rigidisms with the middle way, and arrived at a plump of acting without acting and boundless compassion.
It is a stunningly elegant, meticulously constructed philosophical system. But Nagarjuna, brilliant and relentless as he is, leaves us with one final, ultimate trapdoor.
The emptiness of emptiness?
Yes. Even this philosophy, even the 11 steps of Madhyamaka logic, even the brilliant concept of the tetralemma are entirely empty of inherent existence.
They are not the ultimate solid truth.
They're just another tool. The texts compare this philosophy to a heavy wooden raft used to cross a dangerous, raging river of suffering, anxiety, and delusion.
You use the rigorous logic to survive the crossing.
But once you reach the other shore, once you truly understand the illusory nature of grasping, you don't pick up the heavy wooden raft and carry it around on your back for the rest of your life.
You drop the philosophy entirely. You let go of the concepts. What remains is the profound ability to engage with reality vividly, directly, before the dualistic mind ever tries to slap a label on it.
You just let go.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative thought to explore on your own.
Something to chew on.
We spent a lot of time analyzing the emptiness of time, proving that the past is entirely gone, the future is entirely unwritten, and that time itself is just a relational construct we project onto moving objects.
Right.
Think about the implications of that for your own psychology right now. If the past and the future are merely illusory constructs with no absolute inherent reality, what happens to the crushing burden of your past regrets?
And what happens to the paralyzing weight of your future anxieties?
They vanish entirely, because the solid temporal containers holding those regrets and fears simply do not exist. You are carrying empty boxes.
Tomorrow morning when you wake up, I challenge you to try something.
Look at a tree outside your window, or read an email, or look at a loved one across the kitchen table, and try to do it without being the perceiver.
Drop the heavy, exhausting narrative of the solid I who is separate from the experience.
Let the tree just be the treeing. Notice the verbs, and let the nouns dissolve. See you on the next deep dive.